Have you ever wondered whether anyone could escape America's most famous prison? Alcatraz stood on a small island inside San Francisco Bay. The prison became famous because escaping seemed almost completely impossible for prisoners. Cold water, powerful currents, and armed guards surrounded the island completely. Many criminals tried escaping, but almost nobody successfully reached the mainland. Then, in 1962, 3 prisoners created one of history's greatest escape plans. Their names were Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin. They secretly planned escaping from Alcatraz for many months together. Their story remains mysterious because nobody knows exactly what happened afterward. But their incredible escape began with one prisoner arriving at Alcatraz. Frank Morris was born in Washington, D.C., in 1926. He experienced a difficult childhood and spent time inside different institutions. Morris became involved in crime while still relatively young during adulthood. He developed a reputation for being intelligent, careful, and extremely determined. Authorities arrested him for several serious crimes during his criminal career. He escaped from different prisons before eventually arriving at Alcatraz Island. His previous escapes demonstrated his unusual ability planning complicated prison escapes. Morris understood security systems and carefully studied weaknesses inside prison buildings. Then authorities sent him to America's most secure federal prison. In January 1960, Frank Morris arrived at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. The prison stood on Alcatraz Island. The island was located approximately 1¼ miles from San Francisco. The prison housed dangerous criminals considered difficult controlling inside other institutions. Alcatraz guards watched prisoners closely during every part of their daily routines. The prison had strong walls, locked doors, and carefully controlled movement. The surrounding ocean created another enormous barrier between prisoners and freedom. The water was extremely cold and contained powerful currents near the island. Anyone swimming towards San Francisco faced serious danger from the ocean itself. The prison authorities believed escaping Alcatraz was practically impossible for any prisoner. But Frank Morris soon began studying the prison's hidden weaknesses. Morris eventually met brothers John and Clarence Anglin inside the prison. The brothers had grown up in Georgia inside a large working-class family. They became criminals and eventually received sentences for bank robbery. Both brothers had experience swimming and working around water during their lives. This experience later became extremely important for their escape plan. Morris believed the brothers could help create an escape from Alcatraz. The 3 men secretly began discussing different escape possibilities together. They knew escaping required patience, creativity, and extraordinary secrecy from prison guards. They also understood one mistake could destroy their entire plan immediately. Their plan would require tools that prisoners were never supposed to possess. The 3 prisoners occupied cells inside the same prison cell block. Their cells were located near an unused utility corridor behind the prison walls. The men discovered the walls behind their cells had weak ventilation openings. These openings could potentially provide access to hidden spaces behind the cells. However, creating an escape route required removing thick concrete around the openings. The prisoners secretly searched for tools that could help them break through. They eventually obtained small tools through various prison work assignments and contacts. Their tools were simple, but the prisoners used extraordinary patience and creativity. They worked slowly because making loud noises could attract immediate attention. Every small mistake could reveal the entire escape plan to prison guards. The prisoners worked mostly during periods when prison noise covered their activities. They used homemade tools to slowly widen openings behind their prison cells. The work continued for many months while ordinary prison life continued around them. Guards walked nearby without realizing a secret escape tunnel was growing behind walls. The prisoners needed hiding their progress from guards during regular inspections. They created fake objects that made their cells appear completely normal from outside. These objects helped hide the enormous hole developing behind their prison cells. The escape plan became more complicated with every passing month. But the prisoners still needed solving one enormous problem: escaping the island. Breaking through the prison walls would only complete the first part. The prisoners still needed crossing the dangerous waters around Alcatraz Island. They could not simply swim because the cold water could kill them quickly. They needed creating something capable carrying 3 men across the bay. The prisoners secretly collected materials from inside the prison whenever possible. They gathered raincoats because the material could become useful for building equipment. They also needed finding a way inflating their homemade escape device. Their plan required turning ordinary prison materials into a survival tool. The escape plan was becoming more dangerous, complicated, and unbelievable. Meanwhile, prison guards continued believing Alcatraz remained completely secure. The 3 prisoners continued acting normally while secretly preparing their escape. They followed daily routines and avoided attracting unnecessary attention from guards. Their greatest advantage was patience because their plan required many months. Frank Morris carefully organized the escape while the Anglin brothers helped him. The men understood their plan needed perfect timing during the final escape night. They also needed disguising their absence until guards discovered their empty cells. Soon, the 3 prisoners would attempt one of America's most mysterious escapes. But before escaping through the prison walls, they needed completing their secret tunnel. They also needed creating a raft strong enough crossing the freezing bay. The final escape would require courage, luck, and perfect preparation together. And one night in June 1962, their incredible plan finally began. For many months, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers secretly prepared their escape. They worked carefully because prison guards could discover their plan at any moment. Behind their cells, a hidden passage slowly became larger each month. The prisoners used simple tools to remove concrete from the prison walls. They worked whenever normal prison sounds could hide their dangerous activities. Sometimes they used loud music to cover the sounds of their work. They also created fake heads that looked surprisingly similar to sleeping prisoners. These fake heads became one of the most important parts of their escape plan. But the prisoners still needed escaping through the prison roof. The hidden passage eventually connected their cells with an unused utility corridor. This corridor led toward the upper parts of the prison building. The prisoners discovered a way reaching the roof through a ventilation area. They secretly climbed into the hidden space behind their prison cells. The area contained pipes, machinery, and equipment connected with the prison building. The three men used this hidden space preparing their final escape. They needed hiding their activities from guards during regular prison inspections. Their fake heads helped make their cells appear occupied during the nighttime hours. The heads contained human hair collected from the prison barber shop. They also used soap, paint, and other materials creating realistic facial features. The guards might believe the prisoners were sleeping inside their cells. While preparing the escape, the prisoners also created a homemade raft. They collected hundreds of prison raincoats for this dangerous construction project. The raincoats were joined together using special methods inside the prison. The prisoners hoped the material could keep them floating across the cold water. They also created inflatable life jackets using similar waterproof materials. The entire project required enormous patience and careful preparation from the prisoners. Every piece of material needed hiding from guards and other prisoners. The men understood discovery could result in punishment and complete escape failure. Then, on the night of June 11, 1962, everything changed. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers prepared for their final escape attempt. They placed the fake heads inside their beds before leaving their cells. The heads looked realistic enough to fool guards during nighttime inspections. The prisoners then entered the hidden passage behind their cells. They climbed through the utility corridor and reached the prison roof. The three men carried their homemade equipment toward the island's edge. Their escape plan had finally reached its most dangerous moment. If guards discovered them now, the entire plan would immediately collapse. The prisoners climbed down the prison walls toward the cold water. They eventually reached the shoreline carrying their homemade raft and equipment. The Pacific waters around Alcatraz were extremely cold during the nighttime hours. Strong currents could carry swimmers away from their intended destination very quickly. The prisoners inflated their homemade raft before entering the dangerous water. They knew the raft might not survive the long journey across the bay. However, remaining on Alcatraz meant certain capture after guards discovered their empty cells. The three men pushed away from the island and began crossing the water. Nobody knows exactly how far their raft traveled that night. The darkness made their movements difficult seeing from the prison island. For the first time, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were free. The following morning, prison guards began their regular cell inspections. A guard approached Frank Morris's cell and tried waking the sleeping prisoner. The fake head did not move when the guard touched it. The guard quickly realized something was seriously wrong inside the cell. Soon, officials discovered the three prisoners had completely disappeared. Their cells contained fake heads, hidden holes, and evidence of the escape plan. The prison immediately began searching the entire island for the missing prisoners. However, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were nowhere inside Alcatraz. The biggest prison escape in Alcatraz history had already happened. Authorities quickly launched one of the largest searches in prison history. Boats searched the waters surrounding Alcatraz and nearby areas. Aircraft searched the coastline and islands around San Francisco Bay. Investigators discovered several pieces of evidence connected with the escape. They found personal items and materials that may have come from the raft. However, they did not find the three prisoners anywhere. No confirmed body was ever recovered from the cold waters. No confirmed sighting proved the prisoners reached the mainland either. This created one of America's greatest unsolved prison mysteries. The FBI investigated the escape for many years after the prisoners disappeared. Officials considered several possible explanations about what happened that night. The prisoners could have drowned in the dangerous waters around the island. The homemade raft could have broken apart during the difficult crossing. The powerful currents could have carried the men far away from San Francisco. However, another possibility continued fascinating investigators and the public for decades. Perhaps the three prisoners successfully reached the mainland and escaped forever. But did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers actually survive? After the three prisoners disappeared, investigators began searching everywhere. They searched Alcatraz Island, the surrounding waters, and nearby coastal areas. The search continued because authorities needed discovering what happened that night. The cold water around Alcatraz created extremely dangerous conditions for escaping prisoners. The water temperature could cause serious problems for anyone swimming long distances. Strong currents could also carry a small raft far away from its intended direction. However, the prisoners had prepared carefully for these dangerous conditions. Their homemade raft was designed keeping them above the freezing water. They also created life jackets using materials collected inside the prison. This evidence made the escape mystery even more difficult solving completely. Then investigators discovered something that created new questions about their survival. Search teams found several personal items floating near Angel Island. They also found a paddle that might have belonged to the escaping prisoners. Authorities discovered other materials that appeared connected with the homemade raft. However, none of these discoveries proved exactly what happened to the men. The evidence could suggest the raft broke apart during the dangerous journey. It could also suggest the prisoners reached another location before abandoning equipment. Investigators could never establish one completely certain explanation about the escape. For decades, the official mystery remained completely unsolved. The FBI eventually ended its active investigation after many years. However, authorities continued keeping the case open for future information. The 3 prisoners remained officially listed as missing and possibly deceased. No confirmed bodies were ever discovered from the dangerous waters around Alcatraz. No reliable evidence proved that all 3 men definitely drowned. This absence of clear evidence kept the escape story alive for decades. People around the world continued debating whether the prisoners survived. Some people believed the men successfully reached the mainland and disappeared. Others believed the dangerous ocean conditions eventually defeated their escape attempt. Then, decades later, new evidence suddenly appeared from an unexpected source. In 2015, a photograph appeared that created international attention. The photograph showed 2 men standing together somewhere in South America. Some people believed the men looked extremely similar to the Anglin brothers. The image was examined by experts using facial recognition techniques. However, the photograph could not prove the men's true identities completely. The possibility created new public interest in the famous Alcatraz escape. If the men had survived, they would have lived many decades afterward. They would have needed hiding their identities and avoiding American authorities. The mystery became even more fascinating because possible evidence kept appearing. In 2018, another unusual development attracted attention from investigators and journalists. A letter supposedly written by John Anglin was sent to authorities. The writer claimed the 3 prisoners had survived the escape. The letter stated that Frank Morris had died years earlier. It also claimed one Anglin brother was still alive somewhere. However, authorities could not prove the letter's authenticity completely. The handwriting created questions because experts disagreed about its origin. The letter therefore created more mystery instead of providing a final answer. Even today, nobody knows exactly what happened after the escape. The escape became one of the most famous prison mysteries in history. Many people believe the prisoners successfully reached the San Francisco mainland. Others believe the cold water eventually caused their deaths during the crossing. Some theories suggest the men received help from people outside the prison. Other theories suggest the homemade raft carried them toward another island. Unfortunately, No theory has received enough evidence proving complete certainty. The truth may remain hidden beneath the cold waters of San Francisco Bay. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes this story so fascinating. The three prisoners spent months planning their escape from Alcatraz. They created tools, fake heads, a hidden passage, and a homemade raft. They escaped from a prison believed to be impossible escaping successfully. Then they disappeared into the darkness without leaving a confirmed final destination. Their story became famous because the ending remains completely unknown today. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers may have drowned during their escape. Or they may have reached freedom and successfully disappeared from American authorities. Nobody can say with complete certainty what happened after that night. The mystery remains open in the imagination of millions of people. The Alcatraz escape teaches an important lesson about impossible challenges. The prisoners faced a prison designed preventing escape at every possible point. They had limited tools, limited materials, and extremely dangerous ocean conditions. Still, they created a plan using intelligence, patience, and careful preparation. Their escape demonstrates how determined people can solve seemingly impossible problems. However, their story also shows the enormous dangers involving desperate decisions. Freedom required risking everything against one of the world's most dangerous waterways. The final answer about their fate may never be discovered. Did Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers drown during their escape? Did they reach another island before disappearing forever from public attention? Did someone help them continue living under completely different identities? The evidence does not provide one clear answer to these questions today. That is why the Alcatraz escape remains famous more than 60 years later. Three prisoners escaped America's most famous prison and disappeared into history. Their bodies were never found, and their final destination remains unknown. Sometimes the greatest mystery is not how people escape. Sometimes the greatest mystery is what happens after they disappear.